Welcome to the Backyard Professor videos. We are going to learn tonight about how radical Joseph Smith's theological innovations really are and were. This is not me saying this. This is the assistant professor to ancient scripture at Brigham Young University in 2019, Nicholas J. Frederick, said this. And we are going to explore this topic tonight. So let's jump right in, get started. So tonight I'm going to do a serious deep dive into a most significant and interesting topic that there's lots of topics in this new book that I've acquired. It is already a couple of years old, Producing Ancient Scripture by Michael Hubbard McKay, Mark Amherst McGee, and Brian M. Hauglid, all three excellent historians. They're discussing Joseph Smith's translation projects in the development of Mormon Christianity. When I first heard, I'm going to discuss the chapter by Nicholas J. Frederick. When I first heard this book being discussed, it was basically a critique saying that all these guys are doing now is trying to give us a new nuance of translation. They have no real interest in understanding translation. They're going to nuance it away so that they can still continue getting away with Joseph Smith being a prophet. The more I read into this book, the more I disagree with that, what I consider to be a rather hasty judgment and conclusion about the book. And this particular chapter that I get into tonight will show you just what I mean. We are going to talk about the interesting ancient Greek parchment of John the Evangelist that Joseph Smith translated in a revelation of that parchment, which is really a unique concept. I've never really paid attention to this like I should have, even as an apologist. But now that I have jumped in with both feet on this subject, the radical changes, the innovation that Joseph Smith made in the theology, in the psychology, and the social structure of the church in his day in 1833 through this process, through this remarkably interesting process of translating ancient texts, is what I want to talk about tonight. He radically transforms the several, I will say, main theological tenets that John in his gospel described. Joseph Smith used the lingo from the gospel, and in the process of utilizing the language, he changed it up to provide a very different theology. From his followers' point of view, it is this precise adding to our knowledge new information that the rest of John's gospel that is incomplete had but was lost. And Joseph Smith is restoring this through his revelation. After reading this particular chapter and analyzing the historical, the archaeological, and the linguistic materials available to us, I'm of the mind that Joseph Smith just made it up. The evidence is pointing this direction strongly, and I'm going to do a deep dive into this tonight. In order to really appreciate the impact of how Joseph changed the theology and how he added to the historical nuances, and in the process convinced the church that he was doing what a true prophet ought to do, I found that when I became acquainted better with the Gospel of John, which I have been doing for the last several weeks now, it's even more of a powerful impact to see how awry Joseph Smith went. So what I need to do is to put the Gospel of John language into our minds. I'm going to explore in depth the prologue of the Gospel of John with you. That's John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. I've got some slides that I will share with you while I'm doing this. This is very, very helpful, and I will point out aspects of where John emphasized stuff and where Joseph Smith changed it up in order to answer some of the failures of the Christianity in his day in the 1800s. So this would have had absolutely no concept in John's mind. And yet Joseph Smith, through his very clever translating from a missing portion of the gospel in a vision/revelation, can get away with it because nobody can check up on him until now. So that's what I want to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started with this. John 1:1, ein arche ein hologos. Now, I've highlighted the words that I'm going to be discussing in this discussion. John specifically starts with this preposition of ein. Now, this is a very interesting start. Not all of the Gospels do it this way. The impact of this is that John's situating his gospel with this primary preposition in a fixed position. Now, and this fixed position idea, this can mean fixed in time, in which case we see that's what has happened, or it can be fixed in space. So the idea of a fixing is in place with this preposition, or it can be a state being fixed in a certain state. And by implication, this brings out the instrumentality. That is a relation of rest. This particular ein, this preposition, is between the Greek eis and ek, and it means in, at, or upon. And so it's something that can be perhaps between, but that's in a different usage. The translations, for the most part, do translate this preposition as in arche ein hologos. In the beginning was the Word. And there's the arche. Now, this particular word is so interesting in the Greek as well, because we don't, when we read the text of the Bible in an English translation, we get the false feeling, we get the false idea that, well, we see the Greek ein arche ein hologos, and of course the translation is in the beginning was the Word. So there's a one-on-one meaning, but that is very, very rare. It very seldom happens, and it most especially does not happen in neither the Hebrew or the Greek. This is why it's very helpful to explore the biblical languages while we try to get what these ancient cultures were doing, how they lived their lives, what their theology was like, etc. This archy is very interesting in that it implies, it has the idea of rule. And this means kingly. It is a magisterial rule. It's a personal sense, like a ruler or a magistrate. And so, being from the Greek archomai, this is a commencement, but it also means a chief, as in a chief of a tribe, a commencement. And it has various applications when it is applied contextually, either in an order or about order. It can describe things with space or time or rank. So there is something here about the magisterial power. It can be a principality. And so this arche, if we just simply translate it as in the beginning was the word, we don't quite get the gist and the nuance of this magisterial, kingly, chief, ruler theme here. And this is how John, none of the words in John are accidental. He has deliberately crafted his story, picking the Greek words he wants. The interesting thing about this gospel is it has what the academia would say is a high Christology. The synoptics, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they're called synoptics because they all see eye to eye. They're more or less essentially about the same character, performing the same deeds, having the same experiences. John's is completely different. His is a higher Christology. His is a much stranger gospel in many, many respects. He is much more philosophically, theologically developed, as it were. And he is, in some regards, the Gospel of John is exactly the opposite kind of document in its beginning, middle, and end than the first gospel we have, the earliest gospel, which would be Mark, which, by the way, I am going to be having Professor James Tabor on tomorrow night. He's a biblical archaeologist, a Dead Sea Scroll archaeologist and historian, and we are going to be discussing his course on Mark, which is a magnificent course. But we'll be on an hour earlier than normal. We'll be on at 5 o'clock, not at 6 o'clock. So keep your eyes peeled for that and come on over to the 5 o'clock live session. We'll be talking about this Gospel of Mark. John's is a completely different animal. So the next idea that now this anarchian logos, it's this word, of course, that's the big one. And I mean, everybody makes a big whoop-de-doo about this. I've actually made a sort of a big whoop-de-doo about it myself. Here's why, though. And again, word is okay as a translation. You know, in the beginning was the word. We've all heard that, yeah. But that doesn't work. And it just misses the overarching full significance of what John is trying to set up at the beginning of his gospel, which is going to reflect on the rest of the manner of the way he tells the story about Jesus, which is really different than the other gospels. So this logos idea, the semantic range of meaning, and what that means is in context with certain types of people, logos is going to mean something. In a different context, in a different place, perhaps discussing ideas rather than people, it's going to mean something else entirely. So the whole view of the logos is basically embodying an idea. the idea of an idea. You know, like when you go, oh, hey, I have an idea. This is kind of something the logos is inclusive with. It also is a statement or a speech. So, for instance, Cicero's speeches, each one of those speeches, or say Socrates' speech at his deathbed, etc., all of that embodies and accompanies or is the logos. So you can see, right, because the speech can have 100,000 words. I mean, some of the ancients just blathered on and on and on, sometimes like I do. This logos theme involves much more than a word. There's also the ideas present with what words point to. Okay, so this is another aspect of the logos that's important. By implication, it can be a topic. For instance, my video tonight is logos. Even though I'm not going to make a big whoop-de-doo about the logos alone, the whole embodiment of my information I'm to share with you tonight is logos. Another aspect of this, it's a subject of a discourse. Now, this then leads to the principle of a reckoning, of a reasoning. So, and we mean reasoning in the sense that we understand it. For instance, we see the sun every morning come up in the east, go across the sky, set in the west. We see that day after day after day. So we reason among ourselves as a society today, well, that's because the earth is spinning on its axis. And so the sun looks like it's going across the sky in the same direction all the time. That never changes. We reason that that celestial phenomenon is because of our terrestrial spinning on its axis. Now, the ancients thought the other direction. They said the earth is not moving, it's the center, it's the sun that is circling around the earth. All you have to do is watch the sun move across the sky every single day, right? It's the thinking behind, it's the idea of using what we see, what we hear, to come to information and being able to take those ideas and share them with what? Words, speeches, all of that is logos. Okay. John knew this. His ancient audience knew this. We don't as much simply because we're so used to reading a word for word translation that we don't stop to think there might be more to these words than we think. And I'm going to show you that fundamentally tonight. In fact, I'm showing it to you right now with this logos. And there's many more Greek words I'll expound and explain. So it is also a motive. It can involve a motive. It can involve, by extension, the mental faculty, our mind. So see, now we have the word, we have speech, we have actual discourses. Now we have our reasoning. That leads to thinking of our mind. It's not a physical thing. We still don't quite grasp what our mind is, but this logos would embody and cover the mind as well. So you can see how much more broad this thing really is than just saying, oh, yeah, it means word. Well, yes, but there's a lot more to it than just word. And it's a computation. And that's really sincerely literal computation. Like take the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Through the process of demonstrating this theorem that has always held and it always will hold, because it's not a theory, it's a theorem. It's been tried and tested for millennia, and it is true. The computation, the principle of how to compute using numbers now, see, That's logos. So this involves words. It involves something that's not physical, our minds, and it can also involve numbers as well. So this is a great big concept, is what I'm trying to get across to you. Now, it's used with the article an archi ein ho logos, that little O, logos. The article with it for John, the way he's setting this up in the Greek grammatical aspect, for him, this means a divine expression, and he will expound later on in his gospel what that divine expression is. So this kind of gives us the idea of an account, a cause. We're talking about communication. This communication can be concerned with doctrine, with history, with mathematics. It's not limited to any particular kind of subject. So that's very interesting. It can have to do with intent, with matter. Now, remember, with our ideas and our reasoning, and we can compute with numbers, it also has to do with matter. So, if we were to attend a physics lecture where the physicist is describing the quantum proton particle and why does it last so long, that entire concept, the whole speech, the physics behind why the proton is the longest lasting particle we're aware of, all of that is logos. So you see, it's not limited to just a religious subject. Like, we get that impression because it's in the Gospel of John, right? It is, that's true, but it's not limited to that. And the Greeks certainly did not, the ancient Greeks did not limit logos to just religious topics. So again, we see this ever branching out enlargement of this logos. So it's a reason and a reckoning and a saying and a treatise. It is an utterance. It is a word. It is a work. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing this, you guys, is because this is John's first big subject, the logos. Now, he's not going to expound on its various nuances and meanings like I just did. What he's going to do is he's going to show an example after example of how the logos functions. That's the whole point of his gospel from his standpoint, right? And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because this is one of the concepts that Joseph Smith innovates with as well. So this will get us used to this type of vocabulary so that we can get ready for looking in on Joseph Smith and how he understands it and changes it. So the logos is a big deal anciently, and it is a big deal in Joseph Smith's day. So kai ho logos ein pros ton theon, and the word was with God. So we have in the beginning was the word, and then kai ho logos ein pros ton theon, and the word was with God. Theon, that last word in the orange there, the pink, is theon. It means deity, theology. The case endings have to match, so we have ton, theon. There's going to be other places where you have tu, theou, etc. We're not going to worry about case endings tonight. The reason I've highlighted that word pros in the green is it's so interesting here that the meaning of the Greek, this particular, it's a strengthened form of pros, and it's a preposition of direction. So the logos here is with God. And the theme is, the idea is something going toward. This involves like a movement, which of course involves an energy. In the genitive case, it can mean it's the side of or pertaining to. With the dative case, it can mean by the side. Something has moved up towards something, so it's by its side. It can be near to, and that means near to in a place. It can be close in time. It can be close with an occasion or with the destination of the relation. So it can mean about, it can mean according to, it can also mean against, interestingly enough. So there's an intent here. It can mean going together with something, etc. But the way it's translated here in John, in the beginning was the word, ein arche ein ho logos, kai ho logos, ein prostron theon, and the word was with God. So the idea here now that we're getting is, first there's this word thing that is so almost all-encompassing that it's just mind-boggling. It involves both material and mental and physical stuff. And now we see that it has a relation with God. There's a movement, there's an energy toward God. This is how John is setting up his gospel. So let's move on and we go to kai theos ein ho logos. And this is, the word was with God, and kai theos ein ho logos, and the word was with God. The word was with God, and God was with the word. Kai theos ein ho logos. So it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street. He was with the God, and the God is with the word, and the word was God. Kai theos ein ho logos. God was the word was God. So first we have this word, and it involves everything, literally. Then we realize, okay, it's in a relationship with God. There's something about a movement toward, being next to, and now he ends the whole concept with, well, actually, this was God. The movement toward God is so close, the proximity becomes so tight that you don't distinguish between it anymore. The word is God, God is the word. This is how John is setting this up so that he can show illustrations of this logos. Okay, so that's the setup for John on the logos. Now, the hutos ein arche pros ton theon. Now he says he was in the beginning with God. So he starts by saying in the beginning was the word. Nothing about God, just the word. And the Jewish rabbis have this concept that God used his word. There's famous utterances that the Kabbalistic rabbis especially mentioned that God said. This is in the Sefer Yetzirah as well. It's in the Bahir big time, but in the Zohar. It was actually talking that God did the creating. So you can make this literal, and there's also another figurative. There's also a philosophical angle to this as well. So he says, well, first there was the word, right? Well, okay, that's not enough. Then the word was with God. Okay. Well, actually, the word was God, and the word was in the beginning. So, yes, and I know this is so typical of theology, right? Yes, there were two things. And yes, they were both in the beginning. But actually, they're close enough that the two things are actually just one thing. This is kind of the colloquial way of describing John. There's a reason why he's setting it up this way. Joseph Smith will take advantage of this, as we'll see tonight. This particular verse is exquisitely interesting, and I've color-coded it because I want to describe all four of these different words. Pantadiau tu egeneto. Egeneto. Panta. Now, this word, actually, the translation is all things through him came to be, is basically the literal translation. Through him, everything began, is how we can translate that. Now, this Panta, this crazy word is the medieval Pantocrator. This is what they called Jesus Christ in the medieval ages, Pantocrator, the universal Lord. And you know those. There's several art forms. There are several paintings of Jesus where he is just standing there, just stern. I mean, he looks like a bad boy. He's frowning and he's glaring. I mean, he is not goofing around. He is all business. And they describe him as the Pantocrator, the universal Lord. That's the idea with this Panta. It's the adjective that means primarily all. And that's how we translate it. All things came to be through him. But it means it literally. I mean, everything. Now, when we say all, everything, it's the whole. WHOLE. This includes both of the mental ideas that everybody has ever had. This includes the material world, the universe, the cosmos. Now, cosmos in Greek means the world. We have made it so that it's the cosmos, the starry heaven above, right? So that's Urano. But anyway, so the cosmos, the mental, the physical, the spiritual, the psychological. When it says all things, it is in total, completely conclusive. And in fact, my particular interpretation is that here John is trying to introduce us to the infinite. And this is what makes his gospel so much different than any of the Mark, Matthew, or Luke, because John is really going all total out on purpose, intentionally, because of his theme in his gospel, which is not the same theme in the other gospels, including the beginning. You'll notice here, I mean, we're already in the cosmos in verse 3 even. And there's nothing like this. Two of the other gospels, they deal with Jesus's earthly birth, you know. He was threatened. The Magi came and visited the baby Jesus. Yeah, it's the Christmas story, right, Luke? And then, of course, Herod was jealous, so he started killing all the babies, which is a myth. That never really happened. But in order to avoid the danger of having Jesus killed, they dodged down into Egypt, you know. And there's several New Age stuff that say, well, that's where he learned all of his power and all that crap. There's no story in John about a precocious teenager, 12-year-old in the temple, showing up all of the elders and the scribes in the temple like there is in some of the other gospels. No, this begins in a much broader context. This is one of the distinguishing characteristics of this Gospel of John, right? So when it says Panta, it means absolutely everything. Now, this second word, the one in the purple, D, Panta D, there's a little mark up above next over to that I. That's because this is dia. This is the Greek preposition dia, and they had to mark out that they left out the A. Now, this is just simply our English word for diameter, diameter. That's the thing, that the line that goes entirely through the circle, the diameter. So the D, the Panta D, is everything through him. The orange is him, autou, egeneto. I keep saying egeneto, and it's egeneto. From ginomai, this particular verb is about the cause. And it does give us a hint. Egeneto kind of is like generate. It can be similar to Genesis. That's the first book of the Hebrew Bible about what the beginning. So this is one reason why the academia and the scholarship say John is echoing the Jewish creation story in Genesis, because he's using similar vocabulary that somewhat matches the Genesis 1 account of the creation. So this ageneto is generate, Genesis, etc., and it means to cause to come into being. Figuratively or literally, it does not matter, something that can be published or finished or fulfilled, brought about. That's the whole idea. So all things through him came into being. Panta di autou ageneto. And then the next particular statement that I want to look at, kai kodes autou ageneto udein ho. Now, this is a negation. What he's doing is he's giving us the total wraparound off and on. Kai kodes autou ageneto ude ein is the negation ho gegonen. Now, what this says is, we just read all things came into being through this word, this logos, who is God, right? So now he's saying, and without him, nothing came into being. The pink ude ein ho, there's the green gegonen, and this is very similar to ageneto, that previous word I was just slobbering on about. This is another form of it, gegonen. So it's not only saying all things came into being because of this thing he's calling the word, which he equates with God, but then he says, in fact, not one thing happened without this word. So he's just reinforcing. He's taking it this way, then he's flipping it over this way, making a sandwich of it so that you really get the point. It's kind of a, they say it's a trait of Greek, all right? So that's how that works. So now, enautou zoe in kai he zoe in tophos ton anthropon. Now, this is really interesting. Enautou zoe. He adds another layer of dimension here to this thing he's calling the word, which he's equating with God. Zoe, the blue word there, the word in the blue, the first blue part. This means life. In him was life, and this life, kai izoi en tophos ton anthropon. So there's light. This is really interesting. John is just still blowing up this balloon of what this logos is. Now we're finding that it's light and it's life. It's life, and it's the light of the life of everybody. Anthropon, anthropology. That's our word for anthropology, right? So anthropon is all of mankind, and he's not trying to be sexist. Women are included in this as well. So this logos thing he is still elaborating on and bringing out and showing you as many of the possible characteristics in as short of a crunch as he can in his gospel. That's kind of how John's treating this. Okay. So the next one is kaitophos. Ein tiskotief funny. Now, and the light in the darkness shines. This last sentence that we looked at says he's got life, but he's also the light of men. Phos ton anthropon. Now he's saying that the light shines in the darkness. So once again, he's adding even one more expansion. It has life. All right. It's God. All right. Now it's got light. In fact, it's the light that's given to all men, and the darkness can't comprehend the light. I'm getting one step ahead of myself. The light shines in the darkness, and then is this next verse. Ke scotia autu u katalaben. The darkness cannot overcome the light. And I greened off that word katalaben because it means to grab, to seize something, to hold it, to hang on to really capture it. And this is what he's saying the darkness can't do to the light. So there's a literal physical aspect of it. It also has to do with the mental aspect of comprehension or apprehension. And we've all experienced this every time. If you go camping and you're late at night and you want to go play sniper or whatever. I used to play snipe hunt all the time. You turn on your flashlight and it skims out through the darkness, and you can all of a sudden see the sagebrush or see the tree. Every now and then, if you're lucky, you can catch deer in the light, and they'll turn and just stare at you, like a deer in the headlight when a car comes around a corner and there's deer in the middle of the road. All of a sudden, the deer is there. The darkness can't keep it hidden. So this light has a property that gets rid of the darkness. And this light, John is saying, is in all of us. Okay? So all of these properties, all of these expansions are intended by John so that he can really see the grandeur of this thing he's calling the Logos. And then this first sentence is, this is introducing John, and then it's the next sentence that I wanted to focus on, so I put it in a highlight. Utos elthen eis maturian, hina maturese peri tu photos. So the first part of it, verse 6, introduces this guy named John. The second part says his whole reason of being here is he's going to witness. He's going to testify, and that's that word martyrian. That's the one I put in green there, that first green one. Martyrian. I'll get to peri in a minute. The martyrian, it's the word for martyr, a testament, a testimony, not necessarily someone who gets killed. That's a later Christian edition. But so out of the blue, this is so interesting. And all the Gospels do this, but especially John. See, John doesn't have anything to do with all of the choosing of the 12 apostles like some of the other Gospels do. He immediately, after telling us about this Logos thing, trying to give us some of the characteristics of this Logos thing, and he keeps adding more and more and more and more and more to it. Then out of the blue, blam. Oh, by the way, there's this guy named John, and he's going to witness to the light. Now, this John the Baptist, he's in every gospel. He's really that important. But the amazing thing is Josephus, the Jewish historian, the contemporary of Jesus, he also knows of John the Baptist. This is a real historical person. So in the early Judaism era, in the early Christian era, this guy was pretty important, but we don't have a lot of information about him. John is writing, remember, he's the later gospel from the other ones. Remember, the New Testament, the way it's put together, is not in chronological order. The Gospels are not the earliest materials on Jesus. The letters of Paul are. He wrote, then after him, the synoptics, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Matthew is 95% of Mark. James Tabor told me that in his last interview with me when I talked to him on my show. You can go look that interview up. 95% of Matthew is simply Mark, and then Matthew adds his own particular twists and turns to it. Luke does more of the same by using Matthew and Mark. And then there's material that's common to Matthew and Luke that's not in Mark. So this is the idea of the Q source. John doesn't deal with any of that. He jumps right to John the Baptist. For a reason, he says, he's going to witness to the light. So John is making, the reason I want to bring this up is because John makes a big deal about the Logos. Joseph Smith utilizes that. John also characteristically is the gospel that talks about the light all of the time. I am the light and life of the world is what John's Jesus tells the people. John the Baptist is here not just to baptize Jesus. You'll notice John's not even talking about John the Baptist baptizing Jesus yet. The first thing out of his mouth is, oh, by the way, there was a guy named John, and he's there to witness about the light that came into the world. So this is John's emphasis, the way he's setting it up. Joseph Smith utilizes that Logos concept. He also utilizes the light and life concept. This is what made John's gospel so impressive. So when we see it that way, and all of the preachers in Joseph Smith's day knew this, then we recognize and realize, oh, then that makes sense that Joseph Smith picked John to be the subject of his translating a parchment in a vision or in a revelation, if you will. Because there's more prestige with John than there is with Mark. And I'll explain that a little later when I get into this article in this book. Right now, I just want to get us used to the vocabulary and used to John's emphasis of the language, because it's specifically the most important parts of John's gospel that Joseph Smith is going to tap into in order to make himself a much more important prophet and translator to those early Mormons and followers. And we'll see this. It is a deliberate psychology that Joseph Smith is dealing with, is what I'm trying to tell you. And that's what he comes up with too in this article. So let's keep going. So he's a testimony. Now, and this second green word, Perry. Oh, where am I? Ioanna Sha Perry. Maturian hina maturese Perry. Now, this preposition is about, it is used variously in, you remember the D that we use, the dia, the diameter going through. Well, this word, peri, our English word perimeter, comes from this. And what it means is it's all around. You go around the perimeter of a circle or a square or whatever, you get the total all the way around instead of cutting through. So he's using specific math language in some respects. He's applying that in order to make this more impressive, because not only does the world come through from this word, but the light is all around, because this word is that, and it's everywhere. So it's kind of an interesting way, the way John is setting this stuff up. So, and that's why we can translate this word, this peri, as a locality or a circuit, a circumstance. It's a superlative point, and that's why, I mean, it can mean above, it can mean about, it can mean against, but it's more or less a circuit. It's around something. It has to do with an excess. It has to do with completeness. And so that's why we can translate this as he came as a witness that he might testify concerning peritu photos. This guy is going to testify concerning the light. And so that was the whole idea with that particular language. Now, and hina pantis, and there's that word panta, hina pantis, pistuosin d autu, and there's that d again, see? So he's keeping it within he's trying to make this as scientific in language and yet as full of philosophical, theological meaning as he possibly can, because the mathematics was very, very important to the Greek culture, and he was in a Hellenized era, a Hellenized land. The science and philosophical themes they had inherited, all of the great Greek mathematics up to that point. So he's trying to show how simply magnificent his whole gospel is. So he's using very technical language specifically to get the symbolism in the people's minds in his community. Remember, he dated 100 years later. Paul was earliest, then the Gospels, and they range anywhere from 60 to 80. And there's some fragments that they're saying date earlier than 60 now. They say they found some Mark fragments that date way earlier, down into the 40s. We don't know if that's completely accepted or not. But the Gospel of John, not only is it dated later, 90 to 100, but it's actually further away geographically. It's over there in Asia Minor. I mean, none of these Gospels were written in Jerusalem. The Jews in Jerusalem were not reading these Gospels because they were available to them. Every one of them, well, most of Matthew especially and John, they were written after the destruction of the temple. And their language reflects that. You can tell by the linguistic clues in the Greek on how they use past tenses and how they talk about certain things like the temple and the idea of their soteriology, their salvation and all. John is way the heck away over geographically and way the heck away in time as well. His community has probably never seen Jerusalem. So there's no reason for him to dwell on all of the details of Jesus's childhood or his growing up years or any of that. His community doesn't know who this is. His community doesn't know who John the Baptist is. His community has no idea about the apostles. So John needs to specifically make a tight, hard focus on who Jesus is. So he's going to equate Jesus with the most overarching, all-comprehensive scientific and literary conception that his world knows, and that's the Logos. It's interesting how he does it. So he's very philosophically strong here, right? So here's the idea. He testifies concerning the light so that hina pantis pistuosin deautu. That's that yellow one. So that all might believe through him. Notice he's calling the Logos him. They want to believe through him. He'll identify the Logos with him, with another him soon. But this guy has to be a testifier of the light. Now in the green, Ukein ekainos tophos all, hina marchiresi peri tu photos. So he's just basically, again, summing it up. He gives you the indication at the beginning. He puts a piece of meat in the middle, and now this is the bottom part of the bun. He was not the light. John the Baptist was not the light, but he was there. Hina marchiresi peri tu photos. He was there so that he could testify about the light. That was John's mission. Now, the ein tophos to elethenon ho photizi panta anthropon. This blue line here. This one is the light was true, alethenon, that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth word over, and hophotesi panta anthropou, this light, which is the Logos, again, remember, this is one of the expansions. This enlightens every man. So one more time, John is adding a concept here. It is a physical light in the cosmos, in the world. It's the sun. It's the stars. It's the moon. It is physical. And now he's moving this physical parameter. Remember, Logos can deal with matter through the word, discourse, our reasoning, our calculating, and working with the stuff that we live with on this planet, right? We can build stuff with it through reasoning and calculating and manipulating the stuff. All that's Logos. Now John is saying, oh, by the way, the Logos is life, the life of all mankind. But guess what? He's also light, the light that enlightens every man. Now he's giving it a metaphorical approach, not a literal. Well, I mean, it's a literal, yes, but it's not like there's a light in our brain that turns on. It's enlightenment. So all phases and aspects of this thing is what John is trying to show us here. That is how the Greek expresses this. Kind of interesting. It enlightens every man coming into the world. And that's the last four words underneath that blue. Erkomenon eston cosmon. See that word cosmon, that's world, is translated world in the Greek in verse 9 there, that last word in verse 9. So anyway, so I'm going to skip 9. Or I just completed 9. Now let's go to 10. Ento cosmo ein kai ho cosmos, di autou egeneto, kai ho cosmos auton uk egno. Now this is really important. It's the yellow and the green. Ento cosmo. And the reason I put the green on cosmos because this is world. We include it much bigger into the entire cosmos. All the other, see, we know about the galaxies and all that noise. These guys didn't. But so they had they limited it to the world. Ein kai ho cosmos. Di autou egeneto. Here we go again. The world came into being, egeneto, through him. There's that D word again. Through him, came into being, and yet kai ho cosmos auton uk. There's the negation, that green word, O-U-K, uk. Kai ho cosmos auton uk egno. So he creates the world, but the world did not know him. And that's kind of weird. How could dirt doesn't know, trees don't know, they don't have a mind like we do. Okay, so this is John's ancient setup. Just bear with him. He's trying to make some points here. Okay, he's using a rhetorical device here in the Greek to really get you to get this, right? To really be impressed with it, and it is impressive. So he makes the world, but the world doesn't know him. And then Esta idia iothen ke hoi idioi auton u parlabon. In the blue and in that brown one. This says to his own he came, and his own did not receive him. The paralabon is the word for received. It's the verb. However, it means to take to as well, to receive, or to acknowledge, or even just something simple like admit. That's what the world did not do. This word, parlabon, is a combination of para and lambano, and it means to receive, to associate with oneself. So this is it. By analogy, to assume an office, Figuratively, you learn. And so here we go with learning, taking an office, associating with, more or less as we translate it in this particular sense in the gospel, we say the world did not receive him. Now, and that the parallelism is he makes the world and it didn't know him. So the world, his own creation, doesn't know him. Then he came into his own people and they didn't associate with him. They didn't even receive him. So there's a double whammy here that John's setting up. This is part of what makes his gospel have punch for his readers. See, that's why this is, again, and I'm speculating when I say this, but this is what puts John on a higher elevation than all the other gospel authors. And I would suggest this is why, in making up his story about translating a text that no longer exists, but used to be part of the Gospel of John, and more will be received, guess who through? Joseph Smith, of course, and he'll translate it. But for now, you get this small snippet. This really impresses everybody that he can do that. Of course, you can't catch him. You can't test him. You just have to take his word for it. And that's what his early followers did. He picked John because John is so much more theologically, psychologically effective. He's more powerful with the way he words his gospel. Whew, that's a lot of talking, isn't it? But it's okay because this is what we want to know. And now, Hosoi de elabon auton edoken autois. Exousian technothiou genesthai. So that purple one, osi de elabon auton. As many as, however, have received him. And then that blue, that kind of blue-purple, edoken. He gave authority to them to become children of God. So we got this idea, created the world that doesn't know him. He came unto his own and they didn't receive him. However, as many as will receive him, now this involves another aspect of this logos. Now he apparently has power. Now, because he's introduced this as he has the properties of life, Zoe, and he has the properties of life and light, the phos, and the light shines. Metaphorically, it can enlighten men. So apparently, he also has the power, based on those ideas, to make them children of God. That's what it's saying. This is one of the strongest parts of John's gospel, and it's this idea that Joseph Smith takes and runs with it. But he adds some twists along the way that was never in John's mind. Because what Joseph Smith is doing is he's using his own theological understanding and presenting a vision, a revelation, where he says, I actually translated the text in this revelation. And this is the true theology of the Gospel of John that was lost through an apostasy. This is the psychology Joseph Smith is presenting his followers. So we got the logos, light, logos and light, life, and now this theme of becoming children of God. All of these subjects are huge in D&C 93, as we'll get to, and I'll show you. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So this is why I wanted to show you this and emphasize this, because what was big in John's gospel is big in Joseph Smith's innovative theology that he then stamped the voice of the Lord onto. according to this article in this book that I'm going to share with you, from an associate professor of ancient scripture at BYU. So really interesting development going on in Mormon scholarship right now on this. And then the red word there, the Genesthai, again, that's Genesis, that's generation. The idea is that comes into being. And that's how they do it, is through this logos. And now I'm finally to the big part of this. Okay. And let me just go back. Don't let all that color goof you up. I cut it off at the very bottom here. I've got most of it. I'll just tell you what it is. This is where he's saying, okay, now this is where you get to become children of God if you accept this logos. He has not identified the logos yet. We already know who it is, but if this is the first time you're reading this, you're blown away. You're trying to go, wow, this logos thing, this God, this word, this idea, this intellectual calculation, this spiritual thing, this thing is amazing. It's got life in it. It's got light. It's incredible. It created everything. Nothing was not made that was made without him, etc. And he's all around the universe. This infinite encompasses this finite world. See, John hasn't identified him yet. So this is getting very, very, very impressive to his readers. I want you to have that impression because Joseph Smith takes that impression and his followers agree with him. Okay, right? So how he manipulates this is really interesting. And I use my word decidedly too. Manipulation is what we have with Joseph Smith. So I'm sorry I cut the bottom of this off. What it's basically saying is this idea of becoming the children of God through the accepting of this logos, it didn't come from blood. And yeah, it's right there in verse 13. Hoi uk ex, that uk ex is the negation. The hymaton, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth word over, right at the very bottom there. Hoi uk ex hymaton ude ek thelematos. So it didn't come from the blood, and it certainly didn't come from the flesh. And the part I cut off here now, I'll read to you. It did not come from the will of men, but it came from the will of God. Okay, now we get into the last part, and this will be the wrap up. The prologue, the prologue is mainly John 1, 1 through 18, and I've got all four of them right here, and I just went ahead and kept them all together so I don't have too many slides to clobber you with. So kai hologos sarix ageneto, kai eskenusen ein hemin. Okay, now the word, see, because we don't understand the Greek, and because we don't really, we've had logos as word, and so we're flat, we're bland, we just don't get it. This verse that I'm about to share with you right now just blew them away anciently. No way. What? I'm serious. It completely astounded his readers and his hearers when they taught this. Remember, John is not in Jerusalem. There's some question of whether he had access to the other gospels. We think he did, but he didn't hardly use any of them at all anyway. We know he had access to the Greek plays of Euripides, the Bacchae, Dennis MacDonald, whom I also have had on a show discussing this. He uses the Bacchae, and he is comparing and contrasting Jesus Christ as the great God with Dionysius, because his particular community, where we think his gospel actually was written, the Dionysian religion, the Greek materials were there and quite prominent. So John is trying to say, no, don't accept that God, accept this one. This one's even grander because this one was the Word. Now, this is what just blows your mind. Kai ho logos sarx egeneto, kai eskonusen ein himin. The Word became flesh. That's that purple, sarx ageneto, on that top line. Kai ho logos, and the Word became flesh. Sarx is the word for flesh, ageneto. Ke ekonusen ein humin. And ikenosen. Oh, I've been pronouncing that wrong. Ikenosen ein himin. And he tented with us. See that green word on that top line? This is so cool. This is kind of a nifty little hark back to the Old Testament. And again, John is deliberately choosing his words. He's doing this on purpose to give them the maximum effect on this. He's not muffing around here. He doesn't just blasé talk, street talk. He is really putting together a carefully crafted discourse. So he blows our minds by saying this rational principle. Now, this is the Epicurean, the Stoics as well. This rational principle, the idea that is logos, the idea for rationality, calculation, matter, discourse, speech, word. This became flesh. What? This is John's way of giving the miracle. Nobody in the whole world up to this point had actually thought that a principle like rationality or a tool such as mental calculation, nobody thought that could become flesh. Only souls become flesh. This is where John's gospel, this is where the rubber meets the road here. And this is the part that Joseph Smith also innovates. That's why I'm making a big deal about this part of the Gospel of John. The cool thing is, John summarizes the whole darn thing, all 21 chapters, in these first opening 18 verses. It's a perfect epitome. That's why I'm doing this with the prologue. So John is just killing the philosophers here. He's blowing the religious people's minds when he says this. The Logos, the Word, became flesh, and he tented with us. Tented. He became physical. This mental thing, reason, became physical. And he says he tented with us. This put into their minds ancient Israel's tabernacle in the wilderness. Now, that's the tabernacle that had the two cherubim in the Holy of Holies. And that's the tabernacle where God met Israel at the cherubim. Okay? So you see how he's going to tie this in with that idea. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of Yahweh, met them, those ancient Israelites, in the tent of meeting. That's the other name for the tabernacle. He met him in the tent of meeting. So now he's saying this rational principle, this calculation, this speech, this word, this physical thing was born, and it dwelt with us. That's a mind blow. That's cool. That imagery, he tented with us, is really stinking cool. At least I think. The next thing he says, kai ethiosemetha ten doxon autu. The second line under all that colored first line, the second line. What he's saying here is, eskinosen ein hemin, ke ethiosemetha ten doxon autu. Now he's saying, not only did this logos come and dwell with us, camp with us, tent with us, he camped with us. Didn't Jesus camp with his apostles on the shore of the sea? See, this is kind of it's a very, the impression John wants to leave is, look, we're chums, we're good buddies, we're friends, we go fishing all the time together. We go camping, we eat food together, we sleep together, we walk together, we travel together. He tented and dwelt among us. We knew him. This is personal. And now he's going to add something again. Now this logos thing becomes a man, and now it had life, it had light. Now it's got glory. Doxon is the Greek word. What is glory? One of the meanings of this word is weight, heavy, authority, glory as well. And part of this is a shining, those paintings with Jesus with a halo, the aura around the human. The holy being always has a halo, angels and Jesus and all that. This is the idea of the doxon, the glory, this weight. We beheld the glory of him. And this glory was doxon hos monogenes parapatros. This glory, this is the third light blue word under that first sentence. Doxon os monogenes parapatros. This glory came as the only begotten of the Father. No virgin birth. Understand what John's trying to get here. This is just so astounding. The monogenes is the only one from the logos / God. Remember, there's a movement in pros ton theon, there's a movement toward God with this word thing, this logos. But they're so close that he then said the logos is God and God is the logos. Now this thing is being born, and it's the logos is the only begotten thing from the bosom of the Father. And this is my speculation and interpretation. I know some theologians are going to quack like ducks over this. It's all right. I'm just speaking out loud. This birth, this idea of this logos being born in the flesh and having glory, it's the only one. So God came to earth to be born from the bosom of the Father. Could this be John's way? Could this be John's metaphor for the infinite? Because he's tried to do the Father being a symbol, as it were. Don't yell at me yet. Just hold on. Hear me out. The Father being a symbol, a place marker for the infinite, because that's where John begins this. He doesn't begin it here on earth with an earthly birth. He's way the heck out there in the cosmos. This is the infinite. It's the infinite that gets sucked down to a finite aspect. That would be my speculation, right? I'm not theologizing. I'm just saying his wording here is extremely interesting. He's the only infinite that has, from the bosom of infinity, that has become finite now. That would be my supposition. And again, it's okay if I'm wrong theologically. I'm just speaking out loud. So that was the idea here. And not only is he from the Pater Patros, not only is he from the Father as the only begotten Father, and again, it's the red line. It's the third line down from the top, the red part. Plidris caritos kai aletheus. Plidris caritos kai aletheus. I mean, it even sounds cool in Greek. It just kind of rolls off your tongue. This logos, now, he becomes flesh. And it's full of life. It's full of light. It's God. It's the only begotten. John is just completely expanding this thing out into the chaos of incredible infinitude. And now he says, as a man, as a flesh that tented and dwelt among us, he is also full of grace and truth. I mean, how overall encompassing is this logos? And yet we haven't even scratched the surface of it, right? I mean, in its ancient usage from the outside world. John is doing a quick, tidy encapsulation in the first 18 verses. And of course, it's us moderns who have versified the manuscript. The manuscripts was just one great big long conglomeration of writing. There weren't even any spaces between the words. But now we're told this read, and this pleris. Now this is the pleroma, and I gotta read you this too. The semantic range, that is how often it is used and translated as what. This is the adjective. That means full, or it's abounding in. It is completely occupied with. It's replete. It is absolutely complete. It's full. Pleris Kadritos kai aletheus. It is so full that there's no empty part. And what it's full of is grace and truth. And these can be, they're not physical, right? So this is, again, John is trying to show you, I'm trying to deal with the physical. How do you describe the physical? Eskenos, a tent. He camped among us. He's with us. But how do you describe the spiritual? Or from our point of view, let's call it the psychological. It doesn't matter. Spiritual, I'm good with that. It's all good. How do you deal with the immaterial? John is trying to be all inclusive of all of it. Physical, material, immaterial, psychological, however you want to describe it. This logos includes all of it, including the concept of human. Wow. And Joseph Smith's going to play on this. That's why I'm making a big deal about this. Okay. So bear with me on that. This is really, really important. I'm just about done with the Greek here. It's all good. And then John witnesses concerning him, and he cries out. Oh, yeah. And then John, verse 15, John says, yeah, this is the one I was talking about. I'm not the light. John says, I am not the light, but this is the one who's the light. And it still hasn't identified him. Understand this. We know who it is because we've read the story. The first time you read through this, you still don't understand who this is, right? This is the one who I was saying, he's coming after me, and he takes precedence over me. Erkomenos emprostin mu. He takes precedence over me, and it is because he was before me. Mu gegonen Hoti protos mu ein. He was before me. Now verse 16. We've worked our way up to verse 16 here. Hodiek tu pliromatos autu himais pantis, elabomen kekarin antikaritos. This is the most important part. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it's verse 16. Hodiek tu pleromatos. Now, this is the fullness of him. It is from the hoti ektu. It is from this fullness, autu, this pleromatos autu, of him, that himais pantis elabomen, that we received from this logos, now human, who was full of grace and truth. It is from him that we received, and this is the green part in verse 16, karin antikaritos, grace for grace. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because Joseph Smith takes all of this theology of John in his revelations, in his translations, and he creates a radical theology. And that's what I'm going to get to now. No kidding. This is not just a restoration of what was had before. None of this was had before. This is Joseph Smith bringing out his own ideas, using the voice of the Lord to convince people he's the one who really knows the total truth. And he's just making it up. It's crazy. And that's not my conclusion. That's this author who happens to work at BYU. At least that's how I'm interpreting. I hope I don't get him in trouble. I'm not trying to get the guy in trouble. Oh, and now verse 17. Hori nomos dia moisius erothi e kariske e aletheia. It's through this law of Moses that it was given grace and truth, the karis ke e aletheia, dia Jesu Christu egeneto. Notice what John is saying here. He's saying, all right, look, the law was given through Moses, but it was given the fullness, the law of Moses. It was totally given fullness of truth and grace through Jesus Christ. He's the Word. We're not getting rid of the law of Moses. That's what John's saying. He said, don't stone me, man. I'm not trying to be blasphemous. I'm just simply telling you what has happened here. This is what happened. The fullness of the grace and truth came through this guy named Jesus Christ. That is the Logos. But it came to be inclusive of the law of Moses. Jesus did not come to start his own church. That's the point. John has nothing about Jesus starting a church. It's all through Judaism of his day that Jesus is living and healing and teaching and preaching and being crucified and ascending to become the mighty power in heaven, the Logos resurrected. That's John's point. Nothing about a church. It's so remarkably interesting how this is said. And then the final one, 18. And of course, this is a big one with the evangelical Christians too. This is just huge. Theon udis iorican popote monogenes theus hoon est ton kolpon tu patros akainos exegesato. Now, no one has ever seen God, ever, except the only begotten Son. And that's that brown word there. Second from the bottom up, monogenes theos, the only begotten God. I should say God. This, holy crap. Some of the some of the early Greek manuscripts, the earliest Greek manuscript, now this is huge. Boy, I about blew my emphasis here. Yeah. The word there really is that second one up, monogenes theos. That's God. That's not, if it had meant son, it would have been huios, a completely different Greek word. It's not talking about the only begotten Son. John is talking about the only begotten God here. The later manuscripts changed it to Son. Watch what Joseph Smith does with this one. Wow. Yeah. That's why I highlighted it. Hoon eston kolpon tu patros. Kolpon tu patros is the bosom of the Father. That Greek word kolpon is the overhanging fold of a garment. It's used as a pocket. It can even be a physical bay for ships or a gulf or whatever. So it's by analogy a bay. It's a bosom. It's tight. It's bosom buddies. It's right in the middle. It's from this bosom of the Father, which I would interpret as it is from the bosom of infinity that the finite Logos now, who is full of grace and truth, Jesus Christ, he is the one that is going to reveal the infinity to us, because we can't do that, because we aren't full of grace and truth. So the idea of being able, I would propose the idea of being able to grasp the infinity, to see the infinity, is to believe on him so that he can give you the power to become the children of God. In other words, the metaphor, the children of God. He's going to make you infinite. That's the theme of the atonement. And it's crazy that the Book of Mormon and Second Nephi caught that. Or is it? Could it have been one of the theological things Joseph Smith picked up in his environment with this idea of the infinite atonement? John is kind of hinting at this. He's using theological language. Yeah, he's using language of God and Father and bosom and all that jazz. But this is just amazing. So the themes John's emphasizing: the Logos, the light, the life, the power to become children of God, the bosom of the Father, the idea of all of this stuff, life, light, he enlightens mankind, etc. All of these themes that are so overwhelmingly powerfully put in the Gospel of John, that's not in the other Gospels. Joseph Smith plays with this stuff and propounds a really different view. So let's get to that. Whew. Thanks for putting up with me. I needed to get that into you. I know, because as I was studying this stuff, when I read this at first, I thought, well, yeah, okay. But then I got reading the Gospel of John, and the more I read it, the more I realized, wait a minute, now I get why Frederick was saying what he was saying, because now I saw it in John, in the Gospel of John. So that's how Joseph Smith did it. I'm going to say that again. I didn't get the significance of the theological aspect that Joseph Smith's section 93 was getting at. Once I got reading the Gospel of John and studying it so that I could get used to the lingo, the vocabulary, then I reread this, then I go, oh, I saw it. Oh, so that's how Joseph Smith did it. He's using contemporary sources, which he put into the voice of God as a revelation or a vision, if you will. And then he added the extra superb idea of, well, I even was able to translate the parchment that doesn't even exist. And that makes me super prophet. And that's the psychological effect that this had on the early Mormons. So when I showed at the very front, Joseph Smith was a radical in his theological innovations. Here's the first sentence in Nicholas Frederick's article. And this is chapter 13 for those of you who have this book. Great book. I would suggest you get it. Joseph Smith was a radical in his own theological innovations, yet his ideas found supporters. There's the key right there. And his religion gathered thousands who were willing to accept new ideas about God. Now, Joseph Smith knew this from his treasure digging days. He knew this from being able to create a first vision and seeing the effect that that had on people's psychology, how they began to defer to him and his authority. So the newer, more interesting, more wild and crazy radical innovations you can put out there as revelations and as translations, the more impressive you're going to be. And that's what happened. And that's what became section 93 of the Doctrine and Covenants. I've just never seen it put this way before. That's what turned me on to do this. This is it in a nutshell. And he complied, and it makes him even greater in their eyes. He knew they wanted new ideas. He knew they were starving for something fresh and interesting, and so he agreed. He said, okay, here you go. However, this isn't me, it's him, the Lord. That's all he had to do, and it worked like a charm. So, part of his prophetic calling and the reason his church grew so well is because he actually translated 3 books of Scripture: Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, and the Bible, his translation of the Bible, which was a big deal in his day. Yeah, we look at it today and we go, oh, he didn't do so much. No, he really didn't. But to them, it was part of the real big deal, emphasizing, elevating him as the great prophet. So, presenting revelations that he claimed were translations of ancient text into modern English. There's the key to his power. He also dictated lengthy individual modern revelations. Most of those, of course, benefited himself, even though those revelations were for others. Yeah, kind of interesting that. And often explicitly, these revelations were in the voice of the Lord. To direct the governance and teachings of the church, a revelation was dictated on the 6th of May, 1833. That's when this revelation happened. That became 93. Now, and the Mormons think this is theologically the most magnificent, deep, philosophical, awesome treatise there ever was. They are really impressed to this day with it. Oh, look at my hair. Getting a bad hair day. Oh my gosh. Oh, for crying out loud. Oh, well, I look like an idiot. That's the way it goes. Don't look at me, listen to me. You're supposed to have a good camera presence, right? So, the idea that's so radical is his translation is embedded within a revelation. And that blew everybody away. They said, wow, what kind of power does this guy have? He is really in touch with heaven. He must be real good friends with Jesus. That was the image Joseph Smith always tried to put forth because it elevated him above everyone else. Of course, it makes perfect sense. So the revelation promises in the voice of the Lord that all those who keep all my commandments will see my face and know that I am. So there's the carrot on the stick. Who doesn't want to see the face of Jesus Christ? Now, understand, you guys, in the 1830s, we're talking, this was the burned over district. I mean, there were hundreds of circuit preachers absolutely throughout the United States. Then, of course, just the East Coast. The nation was expanding west, but it hadn't gotten very far. So, I mean, it was all over. And they were constantly harping, arguing, and preaching, but none of them ever claimed to see God because they just weren't righteous enough. They're too big of a sinners. Then along comes Joseph Smith and says, oh, yeah, but you can, in his revelation. And he translates this document to that effect. The Lord declares that he is both Father and Son. That rings a bell now that we studied the Logos, doesn't it? That rings a bell now that we understand that this Logos, this word, became the begotten God from the bosom of the Father. Doesn't say begotten Son, it says begotten God from the bosom of the Father in verse 18 of John 1, right? So now we get it. We're getting a better feel for what Joseph Smith is doing with this. Now this revelation declares he is both Father and Son, and that he will condescend into the world. We just read about that. But not as the Son, if John's theology is accurate. Do you see what's happening here? It's the only begotten God. And of course, the theologians will say, well, yeah, Jesus was God. The Son was God. Yes, that's the modern reading into it based on the later Greek manuscripts, right? This is the value of studying the manuscript history and reading it in the Greek, because it does not say only begotten Son. Not in John's gospel. This very well may be a contradiction, between some of the other gospels. We're not worried about the synoptics. We're dealing with John's gospel. See how Joseph is changing it up here. And then abruptly, the voice of the Lord introduces John, who was apparently John the Evangelist of the New Testament. And he states that a previously unknown record produced by this John offers textual support and an additional witness to his glory and fullness. So you see why I emphasize that from the Greek in that prologue. But notice the carrot on a stick. Well, in our Bible, we don't have the whole Gospel of John, but Joseph Smith knew part of the lost part because Jesus revealed that to him. And while he was revealing it to him, Joseph Smith was able to translate that text. So here's the fuller doctrine, and it's going to contradict what's in John. But that's not me just making stuff up, Joseph says, because it's the voice of the Lord that taught it to me. And this will be revealed in due time. He always put it off in the future, right? But for now, accept this. I was able to share with you this extra knowledge, and therefore that means you're a better chosen people. God must love you a little bit more than your neighbors, because through me, you are now accepting this knowledge. This is the psychology that Joseph Smith plays again and again and again with the people. You'll notice throughout the course of his lifetime that he never stopped translating, ever. Book of Mormon, then he went with the Bible, and he returned back to all of his former translations and changed them all up as his theology developed. And we've got excellent historical evidences in the records now. Thanks to the Joseph Smith papers, we can look that up online. So you got the Book of Mormon, you got the Bible. Now, part of his working on the Bible gave him that great big vision of Moses that he put in the Pearl Gate Prize. And of course, Moses has Enoch, of course, and he is dabbling at this time when he's talking about this Parchment of John. It's 1833. This is the earliest we know that he was dealing with the pure language, the language of Adam, right? So he's trying to establish a connection to the patriarchs. And then just a couple of short years later, bing, bada, boom, the papyri come into town. He purchases them. And guess what? He translates what? The Book of Abraham. In the meantime, the church has been growing. And in the 1833s, he is also receiving more revelations. And in this revelation, there's also a translation involved. This is key to giving Joseph Smith an edge that no one else had. And he used it as fully as he could. So that's important to grasp. So we now can witness his glory in fullness, Johannine concepts. The voice of the Lord further states that the fullness of John's record has yet to be revealed. So having offered this tantalizing information, the voice of the Lord then recites several passages from this unknown record of John, apparently translated by the Lord into English and offered up to Joseph Smith by revelation. Following the conclusion of the embedded translation of the record of John, so I said it wrong. I said Joseph Smith translated it. Jesus in his vision translated it and then gave it to Joseph Smith. So that's how it worked. Following this and the embedded translation, the voice of the Lord relays the remainder of the revelation to Joseph Smith. So that's the hook that keeps people on the line. Now, if God can do this, why couldn't he have done it with the 116 lost pages of the Book of Mormon? You know, this parchment doesn't even exist. And yet, Jesus can translate it and give Joseph Smith a vision. Well, okay, if you lose something, why not just get a revelation and find it? You see, there's inconsistencies like this throughout Joseph Smith's life that we are discovering. The church never told us, of course, because they gave us the whitewashed version of the history. Now, it's significant, and I'm on page, it's significant that I'm on page 305. It's significant that the information contained in this revelation encapsulated the revolutionary nature of much of Joseph Smith's theological innovation. I'm behind on slides. D and C93, Joseph Smith's translation of John's non-existing parchment within a revelation is a rare occurrence, and it's seriously significant. So now, here we have section 93. This revolutionary nature of Joseph Smith's theological innovation, according to the Joseph Smith papers, say that the revelation directly challenged several of the prevailing Christian beliefs at the time, including doctrines of the nature of Jesus Christ, and especially his humanity and divinity, that most Christians believed had been settled in 451 in the Council of Chalcedon. Well, throughout the May 1833 revelation, Smith provided solutions to thorny theological issues such as creation ex nihilo and the nature of humanity. Now, how he accomplished this was largely through the creation of a vocabulary of exaltation, employing terms such as intelligence, light, and truth, all from the Gospel of John. Now he begins to give us a theology of exaltation of all of humanity that wasn't in the Gospel of John. You see, he's making it up. It's very interesting how he's doing this. Creation ex nihilo and all that. None of this could have been on John's mind anciently. This is Joseph Smith's theology. And yet he claims it's from a translation of an ancient document. That's how we know he's the one inventing this, because those ideas weren't in the New Testament Gospels, especially John's. So this is interesting. Smith arrived at the conclusion that exaltation was achieved through the accumulation of intelligence. And my note here is, well, and that would have been on ancient authors' worry, or is this Joseph Smith making stuff up? Yeah. Would they worry about exaltation based on intelligence? No. There's nothing like that in the Gospel of John. This is Joseph Smith's innovative language to bring something new to his flock, to the church that's following him. So, the primary purpose of the translation of the record of John embedded in the 1833 Revelation was to provide authoritative and hermeneutical support for his own theological innovations presented throughout this section of the Doctrine and Covenants, section 93. The claim that Smith had access to an unknown record of John. What this did is it supplied evidence for a 19th century evidence who saw in this convergence of Smith's revelation and the established biblical text of John, this gave them what they were looking for in Joseph Smith, the infallible proofs of Smith's own authority. Furthermore, the additional witness of renowned biblical figures such as John to these innovations introduced by Smith in this revelation, section 93, that demonstrates that Joseph Smith's interpretations were sound and reliable. That's the point. Joseph Smith full well knew that. He knew he could convince people with this very interesting gift of the Spirit that only he was allowed to use and have. Oliver Cowdery at one time attempted to try to translate, you remember, but he couldn't. And so the Lord conveniently told him, well, don't worry about it for now. We'll do it later. And he kept kicking the can down the road. But in the meantime, Joseph Smith, you keep on translating. You see, that gave Joseph Smith the edge over Oliver Cowdery. It's how this always worked out in every single instance with translations and revelations of Joseph Smith. So this is really important. So in relying upon the voice of an established biblical author to provide his own authority for this revelation in May 1833, Joseph Smith availed himself of a popular technique that has been generally used and referred to in an unflattering way as pseudepigraphy. So, according to the Old Testament scholar Moshe J. Bernstein, originally pseudepigraphy was used to describe texts that were falsely ascribed to an author of great antiquity in order to enhance their authority and validity. So eventually, of course, this word came to be expanded to include groups of texts, both Jewish and Christian, that date from the 1st century BCE to the first centuries of the Common Era, and these didn't become part of the canon at all. So the interesting thing is, these also are all just stories. Furthermore, this is so important. The biblical text gave a rich vocabulary. It gave a powerful paradigm for the readers to grasp. Alluding to the language and the verbiage of the biblical texts, the later authors could intentionally link themselves to the earlier authors. And this is exactly what Joseph Smith did, including writing himself into one of the prophecies of the last days in the Book of Mormon, right? Yeah, right. He established a patriarchal priesthood through how? Well, he claimed that the Book of Abraham from the papyri had records from the fathers passing down from father to son. We now know that's not at all how the Bible came to be. He also claimed there was a book of Joseph from Egypt. You see, he's constantly enhancing his own power. That's the point. By tying himself to an ancient biblical authority. Peter, James, and John for the priesthood. John the Baptist for the Aaronic priesthood. Elijah, Jesus Christ, God the Father, John the Baptist. I mean, you get the point, don't you? Very interesting how this works. The ancient writers did the same thing, and it gave the same consequence and result. The figure who wrote the book and then claimed, oh, guess what? This was a revelation to me, became the leader of the society. That's Joseph Smith all the way, is it not? Yeah. We see him do this over and over and over again. This is so interesting. And if your words and verbiage echoes the older scriptures, the book of Jubilees is a complete rewritten account of the book of Genesis. And you can see on that dark brown fragment, if you read the Hebrew, this is Genesis 1. That first word way over on the right-hand side by that little chunk. That's Elohim et ha-shamayim et ha-aretz. Yeah. In the beginning, the front part of it is missing Bereshith bara. Bereshith bara is how Genesis 1:1 starts. So it's Bereshith bara, and then we have Elohim et ha-shamayim et ha-aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Veha Elohim. Yeah. Anyway, that's Genesis. So by utilizing this ancient stuff, and this is so important, this is what the article says. By utilizing the ancient stuff, you lose the criticism, you halt the criticism of someone saying what I'm saying right now. Oh, well, that's just you. Oh, well, that's your idea. You're just making this stuff up. No. It came from a lost work of Genesis, and it's called Jubilees. This is a lost work of Moses. This is a revelation of Moses that has now been discovered, and I discovered it. You see, it automatically elevates that person. Precisely Joseph Smith's method. This is so key to this. So, and let's go to this next slide. The ancient stories were created from older materials as they were reworked in order to change the society, the religion, and the law. Of course, you want to improve. The prophetic reworking gave it updated truth from older, outdated revelations. And that was Joseph Smith's method with all of his translations of presumably ancient texts. Jubilees rewrote this story of Moses that is in this painting right here. One text where scholars have seen the use of textual or authorial appropriation, that is, stealing an author's works to support their theological innovation, is the very book of Deuteronomy. Bernard Levinson argued that the authors of Deuteronomy, what they did is they sought to implement a far-reaching transforming of the law, the religion, the social structure, and this had never happened before. So the solution to trying to convince people that this innovation was legitimate after all is they worded their innovation in the appropriate biblical lingo. They used the biblical language from the scripture they had to write their innovations so that it would look like it was legitimate. Does that sound like anybody we know? I mean, 100%. That's astonishing, isn't it? So now we know ancient parallels showing us how they did it, and we see Joseph Smith doing it. He was clever that way, but only by half, right? So they deliberately presented the vision of the Judean politics as continuous with what had happened in the past. And they used the earlier textual material, and what they did is they carefully transformed it. And what this did is the effect of this through the society is it sanctions their own independent agenda. The disassembly of an accepted authoritative text, what you do is you take it apart. Then what you do is you put it back together and add in your own views, but do it in biblical language. And you have to use key words and phrases. And from their source texts, it gives the new context and meanings, and yet the society accepts that because, hey, this is genuine scripture. It sounds like it. It looks like it because it is it. So he's making up this vision. It wasn't John. Joseph Smith invented him. That's not restoration of ancient stuff. It's Smith's modern view invented as a vision or a revelation. Now, a second fundamental feature of the production of these texts anciently that they call pseudepigraphy is the need for contemporary interpretation. And that's what Joseph Smith had. Everybody had been burned out in the burned over district. They were tired of the same kind of arguments. They were tired of hearing the same kind of theology. So give them something new, but better yet, because you don't want them to think you came up with it. But if you give them a lost text or a text that's been hidden for several thousand years, and then you translate that text in biblical language and say, hey, these were ancient prophets, Book of Mormon guys, and ancient apostles, the John Parchment. And look at what this was. This was had anciently. And now we get it again. I mean, that is a win-win for Joseph Smith and the church. That's how it worked anciently as well. That's what excited me about this article. So, and I'm not going to be able to get through all of this in the detail that I want to, but I will try to at least. Deuteronomy is the product of a radical reworking of the covenant code. He is not saying that in a positive sense of the innovation is so different that it has to be true, it has to be spiritually given through a vision, and therefore it's a genuine translation or a genuine revelation. No, this radical innovation is wild, and it definitely took them off in another direction, just like Joseph Smith did. Okay, very important to grasp. So, the Temple Scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls had the same effect. The way to make it relevant is the original external word of God is outdated, so you update it. And that is what the Dead Sea Scrolls were, their interpretation of the law. That's how it works. The rewritten text asks the reader to accept the authority of their sources and to understand those sources according to the rewritten text's interpretation. And that is what Doctrine and Covenants section 93 is. A rewritten interpretation of the Gospel of John based on a text that doesn't even exist. In other words, Joseph Smith invented it, but by putting it in the voice of the Lord as a revelation, he got away with it. People accepted it and believed him. Isn't that interesting? He did the same thing with every major doctrine. He completely misidentified the ancient polygamy in the Bible. He completely misidentified the idea of degrees of glory and how they work, even though, interestingly enough, the ancient world does have layered heavens. Paul's ascension in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to talk about that a little bit, James Tabor and I, tomorrow. So you'll want to come to that tomorrow night at 5. We start at 5. So, I mean, every kind of innovation Joseph Smith had is based on this principle of rewriting an ancient text or retranslating, is how Joseph Smith did it. They rewrote the Bible in their own theological understanding. And Joseph Smith claims, well, I'm restoring what was had before. But the ideas in his modern scriptures are his. They're the 19th century American Protestant ideas. It's not like the ancients were thinking about that stuff. They weren't. So that's fascinating. As a means of conferring authority, a text may claim to incorporate material that was considered ancient and sacred. Golden plates, anyone? Papyri with the Book of Abraham and Book of Joseph, anyone? Visions of Moses and Enoch, anyone? I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? As a means of conferring authority, a text may claim that it has been dictated by a divine figure at the command of God. Joseph Smith all the way, isn't it? The Book of Jubilees is the co-equal accompaniment of the Torah. Now, you got to understand, the Jews, nothing is added or taken away from the Torah. Jubilees came along just like the Book of Mormon as an extra book of Scripture. Joseph Smith just fits right in line here. It's fascinating. So they are on par with the ancient work. The teachings of the true interpretation is accepted because of the nature of the language that the new interpretation incorporated, which was the language of the ancient text that it took from. A text may claim to be the correct lens through which to interpret the ancient text. And is not that all of Joseph Smith's scriptures? And does not the church do that? Who doesn't know by now that every leader out there in the church uses the Book of Mormon to teach correct biblical principles? Right? Wow. That's fantastic. Now, here's the strategies of conveying authority. The claims to be a translation of an ancient record. The claims to be part of a revelation dictated to Joseph Smith. The claims to be the product of John the Evangelist, the author of a significant New Testament text, the highest Christological gospel of them all, no less. And this reinforces and complements the status or the co-equal accompaniment through an appropriation of John's own language and imagery in his own revelation of that parchment of John in D and C 93. And it is the valid lens. D and C 93 now becomes the valid lens through which biblical theology must change to match Joseph Smith's new revelation. The translation and revelation is bringing forgotten things from the past into existence today as the true character of the ancient materials. This is the book of Abraham. I mean, anything can be invented. This is the book of Moses. This is the book of Enoch embedded in the book of Moses. This is the book of Mormon. This is the lost books of the Bible. This is the Bible translation. This is the pearl of great price. It's all of it. Fantastically interesting. So, we're making good progress here. These revelations that Joseph Smith was giving conferred authority upon his own teachings and his own imperatives. Temple building, he really made a big deal about that. The gathering of Zion, he made a big deal about building up that community based on revelations of new knowledge that the ancients didn't have, and today's Christians don't have it because I'm the prophet the revelation came through, so you really will become completely equal economically, spiritually, psychologically. All will be okay and at peace in Zion if you come and gather and get a temple built and let's take care of one another. This was Joseph Smith's program, and it's how he carried it out, and it is how he got away with it. In one way or another, every single revelation that we read about in the Doctrine and Covenants always ended up benefiting and elevating Joseph Smith. And when you see that, you can't help it. You got to go, that's off kilter. That doesn't quite fit. That doesn't jive. You know he's benefiting from this method without question. It put him in power, and it also kept him in power. And it's why his church was so dang successful, while so many others, yes, they had their own first visions, etc. And sure, several of them started churches, but none of them really made it like Joseph Smith did. The key to his success is the innovation is not apostasy. Now, isn't it interesting that that's a Mormon teaching, however? Right? The innovation is actually what caused the apostasy in the early Christian church, right? But now, no, it's not innovation for us. It's restoration of lost truths. See, that's how it works. So Joseph Smith can make up and imagine anything he wants to, and it'll be validated through what we now recognize as circular, his own revelations, which, of course, he gets to put into the voice of the Lord because, of course, he's making it up. And he's convinced people through translating that he has the power to receive that kind of information. Ingenious. I mean, come on, hand it to him. That is very, very clever. He can claim it's further light and knowledge, right? Fantastically interesting. So, this is a radical departure from former doctrines, and Smith maintains his exalted status in the process. The only one who speaks for the church, and all must come to him and obey him, you see. And then how he puts this is, there's a similar motivation with this May 1833 revelation, the idea of there's no danger of contamination in the line of transmission. You don't have to worry about any corruptions because the parchment that that Joseph Smith saw that belonged to John was translated by Jesus in Jesus's own revelation, and then Jesus gave that revelation to Joseph Smith. So you don't have textual corruption, you don't have any of the mistakes of men. It's the Lord himself giving you the information. There's no text critical problems, and it's very verbally inerrant. And that's our section 93. That's exactly how the church treats section 93. Fantastically interesting how this all comes together now. Does anyone, and this is my question though, this book of Jubilees was rewritten, it was revealed, and it was translated precisely how Joseph Smith did in 93, section 93. But does anyone today accept the book of Jubilees as a book of scripture and live by it? I mean, how many of us have even read it, let alone heard about it? And so why would God go to the trouble of giving a new revelation when it just goes extinct so fast? Or is it God? Is it just mankind finding ways to get power and authority over other men so that it can help them through this life financially? That is precisely what Joseph Smith did. That's how this works. Very interesting. Very interesting. So moving on, and of course, there is a valid historical setting. He set it into an authentic biblical history, John's gospel, right? And he's revered for that connection to the New Testament. Joseph Smith, in essence, becomes in the line of the New Testament apostles. And there was great power and authority in Christianity in America, 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, so on and so forth, in that apostolic association in those gospels. Joseph Smith is a living part of that tradition through these revelations and translations. No wonder he kept doing it. I mean, the man ended up running for president of the United States. What would have been next if he'd won? Hombre of the world, you know? He skillfully combines the priority of the past with the relevance of the present. And did he not do this at Kirtland, Ohio, in the temple revelation, where him and Oliver saw Jesus Christ come down? Then who else did they see? Moses. Who else did they see? Elijah. Who else did they see? And here's where Joseph Smith really gave the game away. They also saw another man, Elias, which is just the Greek name for Elijah. There were not two separate men. That's why we know Joseph Smith is making shit up. It's that simple. So let's keep going. The superior authority of John's witness of the gospel. I mean, he was there with the Lord. See, Mark and Matthew, we don't know if he was ever with Jesus. And Luke, who's Luke? But John, the evangelist, Peter, James, and John. That's why John's gospel was the one Jesus Christ revealed to Joseph Smith, because that's the best one that would enhance who? Joseph Smith the strongest. You see, it always supports Joseph Smith. It always elevates him every time. And he was Jesus's most trusted associate. So Adam Clarke, who was Joseph Smith's contemporary, is one who emphasized this greatness of John's gospel. And we now know, thanks to the article in this very same book of Don Bradley and Mark Ashurst McGee on Joseph Smith translating the Kinderhook plates. Yeah. So this is very interesting. By using John, what this did is this far outstripped Joseph Smith's own authority. We're talking an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ who wrote one of the 4 canonical gospels. Wow, to have that given to you, that's priceless. Makes perfect sense how Joseph Smith got that parchment vision, doesn't it? Yeah, he recognized that. When doctrinal disputes began to trouble the church, both sides looked to apostolic times for guidance and vindication of their own views. You wrote in the name of an apostle simply because the apostle had greater credence than you or any other contemporary did. And that's how you elevated yourself and won your arguments. And isn't that exactly how Joseph Smith did it? That's why he studied the Hebrew, so he could quote the Hebrew authoritatively and destroy the doctrine of those who disagreed with him, whether in the church or out of the church. It didn't matter, you see. That's how it worked. So it gave him a pregnant theology with which to build on. By introducing new theology through the medium of a text written by an esteemed author, in this case, John, one who himself used distinct vocabulary and innovative theology, and he did. The Logos is John's innovative theology, and it is electrifying compared to the other 3 synoptics. So, I mean, come on. If John the Evangelist can do that, so can Joseph Smith the prophet, right? You see the thinking here? That's how it works. So Joseph Smith was able to bestow upon this theology a viability that went beyond the revelation of Doctrine and Covenants 93. And that makes sense too. So this dominated many of the earlier prophetic statements. So Smith had only done what other American authors had done. He produced pseudo-biblical literature that helped Americans situate themselves historically through application and exegesis of the biblical text. That's the conclusion of this author. It's astonishing, isn't it? The best language to do that is the King James Version Bible. And that's why we find it throughout all of his translations, bar none. King James Version. If you did it in that vernacular, you assured yourself that your text, along with, of course, your innovation of the theology, you assured it would be believable and believed. And that is this guy's conclusion. Powerfully so. It means to establish their claims for truth. That's how they did it. Through pseudo-biblicism, that's this guy's, through fake Bible theology, the Bible became a living text, an ongoing scriptural venture. What are we hearing now in church? An ongoing restoration. Yeah. So we have an ongoing scriptural tradition begun by Joseph Smith. And this complemented and it fortified notions of national chosenness and mission. And if there was anything Joseph Smith had prominent in his theology, we have a mission. We are what? The stone of Daniel that broke out and is rolling down the mountain and will roll and gather speed and power and consume the whole earth. The whole world is going to become Mormon. Now that's a mission. How are we going to do it? Oh, through my revelations. I mean, I'm the prophet, I'm bringing all this glorious stuff forward. So, you got to come and join my church. Totally elevates Joseph Smith. 100%. Fascinating how that works. Weaving together languages, both from John and his own theological changes in the languages, the result becomes a living text. And that's what turned on all the early Mormon followers of Joseph Smith. Oh, we don't have the dead book of the Bible. We have the lost materials from then revealed and translated through Joseph Smith. We have the living church. We have the living scriptures. We have the living spirit. Do you get the psychology here? It's very powerful based on this method Joseph Smith tapped into. Genius. I'm not kidding. You make fun of him all you want. He's a far more successful innovator of scripture than anyone else has ever been. Luther didn't innovate. He took out everything about works and said, nope, saved by grace. That's it. Well, that's not genius. That's not prophetic. That's not even fun to read or think about. But Joseph Smith stuff, I mean, this stuff is genuinely creative. Right. Yeah. So he changes. Now, this is where he's weaving some of his changes. And you have the word, and you have the words such as word, life, logos, phos, light, life, etc. But Joseph Smith calls Jesus the Redeemer of the world. That's how John anciently knew Jesus. But John doesn't call Jesus Redeemer of the world. That's Joseph Smith's innovation. Joseph Smith also says that the spirit of truth is not found. And there's a notorious different term to explain the meaning of word, logos, as I certainly have demonstrated to you, I hope. So Joseph Smith's influence in the D&C 93 is his own innovation, and that is this guy's conclusion, page 320 and 321. So I'm out of time. Man, it's 2.5 hours. I have gone on like forever. I forgot to show you the phos. The Greek word phos, the light. Go to the light. Jesus is the light. This is the ancient deity Phanes. And the symbolism here, phos, design means to shine, to glow, light. The idea here is this is him being born from the cosmic egg. You can see all those creatures around him in that oval. That's the zodiac. And then there's the snake of time wrapping around his body, and the snake's head lands on top of his head. And of course, he's holding in his one hand the torch of the equinoxes. In each one of the corners, you can see one of the four winds, etc., etc. So he's being born from the cosmic egg. The idea here is you can think of it as the veil of space-time. Phanes is illuminating. He's opening the veil for us to go into. And it's parting so that it reveals the personification of the ground of being. This is the vulva of the goddess core. This is how the cosmos is born, through light. Now, is that not John's gospel? I just elaborated on it for an hour. And now here we have this stuff. Same principle, just a little bit different kinds of symbolisms, but the meanings are really close. Core is the virgin giving birth to a god. Where have we heard that before? Fully grown. See, this meditation, when we look at the symbolisms and we think about this stuff, we can say, by this God, to the knowledge of my own radiant truth enclosed in the coils of my temporal life. Now, that's a pretty decent meditation, right? I get that out of Joseph Campbell's The Mythic Image out of Princeton. So, I mean, you can look at stuff like this all the time. This is the artistic representation of the words, again, the logos of the gospel of John. So what Joseph Smith did is he changed the Father and Son into two separate deities. He talked about the human exaltation into godhood, etc. That was not a Johannine concept. It's more subtle than that. I'll do another video on that. How about that? I've taken up enough of your time. I appreciate you keeping this long with me. There's a whole lot more deep dives like this I will take, especially in regard to these fantastic concepts and chapters in this material. Yeah, he talks about the Spirit of truth and the Holy Spirit, and he applies the Spirit of truth to Jesus rather than the Holy Ghost. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. So the Christological titles are changed by Joseph Smith. And so the phrase grace to grace was part of the theological vocabulary of the 18th and 19th centuries. That is not how John did it. He said grace for grace. Joseph Smith changed that as grace to grace, because he wanted to innovate the theology of exaltation, which means we, through our obedience to, guess who? The prophet, of course, the church. And as we go from grace to grace, we eventually become gods. You see the subtle change there? It's really important. That was not John's theology. That's Joseph Smith's innovation. John said grace for grace, not from grace to grace, as if there is a progression. That's the innovation. Very subtle, but very interesting. And he's using the environmental factors to invent his theology and say it was a revelation. See, this is how it enhances him. It's most likely attributable to Joseph Smith, he says right here on page 322. Again, this is Joseph Smith. It's not a revelation from Jesus Christ. Not at all. And it certainly was not the ancient Johannine theology in the Gospel of John. Not a chance. No, it was 19th century Joseph Smith environmental influence theology that we get in D&C 93. Innovation or new doctrine does not equate to a true revelation. That's where they fool so many people. I mean, for how many years did I accept that? Well, Joseph Smith's a different theology. Yeah, that's because he received further light and knowledge. It's a new revelation. It's a better package than what you poor apostate Christians have. How many times as missionaries did we spout that nonsense? Yeah, amazing, isn't it? So one of the major purposes of this revelation, May 1833, is to explain how humanity can become exalted. I've already said this. Smith's solution was to claim that human beings existed in a premortal state, and the only theological information about a premortal state in John's gospel is Jesus's as the Logos, not all of humankind. And we know he translated the Egyptian wrong. So the premortal existence in the book of Abraham means nothing. So this is interesting. They progress toward exaltation through the accumulation of intelligence. Notice the subtle influence on a person's ego. There's the hook that gets you to want to stay Mormon. Oh, yeah, let's go be Mormon, man. I can do this. I'm more intelligent because I'm receiving better revelation. And I am moving from one step to the other, to the other, to the other. And all they're doing is just reading their boring Bibles. I'm reading the new light and knowledge and intelligence, etc. Because Joseph Smith claimed grace for grace, he changed it to grace to grace. And that's not the same. And I'm making a big deal about that because that meant so much to so many of my family and friends that I know. They are believing that without ever looking carefully at the Greek of the Gospel of John, or let alone reading the Bible, even in a poor translation of English. It doesn't matter. Mormons won't even emphasize the Bible. They've got their own theologies to believe in, see? Right? It's crazy. This model for this progression, according to the Revelation, is Jesus Christ. So it misunderstands Jesus's mission as well. Very interesting. This is amazing. So that's how he did it. A being that is not from any being, infinite, eternal, unchanging. That's what John was describing. So in him, the godlike and human met and embraced in Jesus Christ. That's the innovation that certain types of Christology, there you go, and anthropology. And it's been radically redefined in the early 19th centuries between God and his Son and humanity. Joseph Smith did not hesitate to assert the utter distinctiveness of the three members of the Godhead. The Gospel of John has none of that. I will do videos showing you the Greek. I'm so not even kidding. It's a shocking revelation to me, too, I know. Because I used to do the apologetic defense of the separate members of the Godhead using the Gospel of John, and I was wrong. It's amazing. It's really interesting. Rather than engage in a theological speculation that employed or even acknowledged the language of early church fathers, such as Athanasius or Augustine, Smith simply returned to the literary wellspring of Christian theology, the New Testament, and he rewrote it. It's that obvious, especially when you analyze it in the Greek. That's on page 324. So this results in a remarkably non-Jonathan gospel, Johannine gospel, Jesus Christ. Joseph Smith's Jesus is not the biblical Jesus. But see, Mormons glory in that because they think it's an actual revelation from, guess who? The real Jesus, which is from, guess where? Joseph Smith's own mind. There's the problem. It's crazy, isn't it? No kidding, man. It is a process of total divinization that Joseph Smith found, or Christ's receipt of the Father's fullness. See, Christ receives the Father's fullness, finally achieved through the experience of mortality. The second phase is to present John's prologue, but silent, omitting the revelation record of John. This is the crucial phrase from John, Ke theos en hologos, John 1 and 1, Ke theos hologos, rendered by the King James translation as, and the Word was God. The revelation included another phrase, in the beginning the Word was, as well as because the world was made by him, and in him was the life of men and the light of men. Yet the phrase, and the Word was God, is omitted in D&C 93, according to this guy. I'll have to look that up. And yet that's the whole crux of the Johannine Jesus, the Christology of John. Joseph Smith changes all that. So anyway, he goes into much more detail. In order for Joseph Smith's exaltation paradigm to work, they needed to present a Christology that was co-equal to its ambitious anthropology, and using the progression of Jesus as a model for humanity to follow is how Joseph Smith did it. And it would fail if Jesus was a being disconnected from humanity, a figure whose emulation stood far removed from humanity's own potential. Yet the Christology needed to be grounded in a scriptural source, and so Joseph Smith invents the John Parchment. It's a collision between Johannine language and Smith's theology language, borrowing from the very language of John, and yet changing it as he went to give this new theology. And it's not the theology of the Gospel of John. He says that on page 325. I mean, wow, this is mind-boggling. I've only got 2 pages left, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. So this theme that in presenting a new scheme of exaltation, this is why the audience saw it as authoritative. Well, it's new. You see the subtle psychology with that? That's interesting. The revelation constructed an innovative paradigm from an allegedly ancient record. That's his words. I'm not saying that. This guy is. Appearing at the beginning of the May 1833 revelation. So the result is now this text's authority, the D&C 93, is enhanced beyond and above the Bible. So now Joseph Smith has more authority than the Bible. Who do you have to turn to get the truth? Why, the living prophet. Where have we heard that before? Yet it's all based on an invention. Man, when you see that, when your darkness falls from your eyes, you kind of go, okay, be still, mine heart. Holy crap. Whew. Take a breath. Breathe deep. Yeah, this is big stuff. This is really interesting. The authority of a revered biblical figure is the key. So who was it that always visited Joseph Smith? Elijah's pretty far up there, Jesus Christ, he's, Moses, come on, Peter, James, and John. Is there any other New Testament? He even did claim to know and see the Apostle Paul, Moroni, all the ancient American prophets too. That's the idea. The authority of the revered biblical figure latches on to Joseph Smith. That's a psychology. A divine authority was granted through the claim that the record was received by revelation from Jesus Christ, of course. Who else? You see, it puts him right in that biblical line, didn't it? Yeah, it's interesting how that works. So you are rooting new ideas in the very ground from which they originally sprung. But now it's your theological innovation and authority and power, not the ancient authors. And that's how you guide your community to do it your way. So, this is fantastic. Carefully integrating passages and phrases from the Old and New Testaments into all of his translations so that he was the prophet. And let's face the music. Has there ever been another Joseph Smith? Come on, man. It's been all downhill from there, you know. Nobody's ever received revelations by the boatload like Joseph Smith did. None of them. Heck, they've had the seer stone for millennia almost, and they still refuse to use them. Well, that makes sense now because Joseph Smith was making it up. Of course, they can't use the seer stone. They aren't in the original gig. Joseph Smith controlled that environment. But these guys today, man, they can't control that environment. And they know it. That's why they lock it away in a vault, because they also know that that stone didn't translate diddly squat. So, I mean, this is amazing. A modernizing or a renovated Bible is what they have. And that's what Joseph Smith accomplished. Fantastic concept. Great book. I will do much more out of it. I'll do some more biblical Greek exegesis and Hebrew and all that crap. Right now, I'm really trying to focus on the Greek. Tomorrow night, don't forget, 5 o'clock, I'll be with Dr. James Tabor, an exquisite biblical scholar. We are going to be talking about the Gospel of Mark and talk about his program on the Gospel of Mark. You can buy it through me, and I get a small commission. It's very small. I promise I'd need to sell 100,000 of them to even buy a candy bar, but it's all good. It's fun. It's not for the money. It's for the sharing of the knowledge of a biblical scholar who spent his entire life on this subject, man. He's very, very good. So I'm very excited about that. We'll have a couple-hour chat, and I will have him on later on in the year. We're going to do a series. And we're going to talk about Paul's mysticism, his ascent in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. I don't know how far we're going to be able to elaborate on that, but I mean, Dr. Tabor's view on the Gospel of Mark is sensational. And you will definitely see tomorrow night, too, as we begin to discuss Mark, you will be able to see the difference between the Christology of Mark and the Christology of John. I mean, it's day and night. It's pretty breathtaking. So thank you for watching my Backyard Professor videos. I appreciate all your support. Don't forget to go to backyardprofessor.org. Give us a donation and help us keep going, and we appreciate all of it. It's a lot of fun to research this material out and share it with you to help you know how to make better decisions when it comes to the religious life, when it comes to your own personal spirituality. Because that's vastly more important than worrying about everybody else's spirituality. I'll catch you next time. Have a good night.